Welcome, everyone, to another Datalere webinar. Thank you for attending. We have a great session for you today. Topic is preparing for agentic AI in the hospitality industry, from reporting to autonomous decision making. This goes in our theme, or aligns with our theme for the year, which is agentic AI. Q1, we talked about how to prepare for agentic AI. And in this quarter and the next, we will be talking about implementation. So we're very happy to talk about specific implementation today in the hospitality industry. Just a little bit about Datalere. We are a data solutions consultancy, which means if you have a business issue, a business problem, business strategy, and you need data to execute that, we help you do that. We have a strong team of almost 24 engineers and architects that can address any issues that you are looking to implement in your organization. We've got over 30 years of experience, and we'd love to talk to you. Got a lot of consulting clients, big and small, commercial and nonprofit. And here are our panelists today. I'm Wayne Eckerson, the moderator of this webinar. And with us today is Matthew Schwartz, our key speaker from Sage Hospitality, and Carlos Bossy, CEO and Chief Architect at Datalere. I was hoping that each of you two would briefly introduce yourselves, starting with Matthew.
Great. Thanks, Wayne and Carlos. Pleasure to be here on the panel today. So as Wayne said, Matt Schwartz, I'm the Chief Technology and what I call AI Change Management Officer here at Sage Hospitality. Based in Denver, Colorado, we're a privately held company. As you see on the slide, we manage over 100 hotels and restaurants in the continental U.S. I have been doing business intelligence and analytics work. I've known Wayne a long time, back Staples and PetSmart, a lot of retail experience in the BI space, and very excited to partner with Datalere over the last few years as we've evolved our BI journey. I've been with Sage for about 10 years and really excited about the topic today.
Great. Thank you. Carlos?
Thanks, Wayne, and thanks, Matt, for joining us this month on our webinar. My name is Carlos Bossy. I'm the CEO of Datalere, and I'm also a data architect by trade. I still get involved in some of our data architecture work, and I've been doing that for either data architecture, data engineering, software engineering, all of my career, and for more than 20 years as a consultant. So my background is very technology oriented, building. We make sure we build solutions the right way, and we have an approach that I like to think always works and gives our customers the solution they need when they need it.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. So let's dive in. We just have a few broad-based questions that we're going to ask of Carlos and Matthew, and perhaps I might chip in as well. But the first one really is going to be directed to Matthew. If you could talk about the evolution of data and analytics in the hospitality industry, let's paint some broad brushstrokes to start, and then we'll dive in what you're doing specifically at Sage.
Sure, Wayne. You think about the hotel industry, people typically think of individual hotels. And you think about an individual hotel, those hotels are operated by various different brands. You have Marriott's, Hilton's, Hyatt's, etc. And then you also have different owners that are out there. So one thing that many people may not know is that many of the hotels, particularly in the US, are not owned or operated by the brands. They're franchised and they're owned by real estate investment trusts or private equity companies who hire management or operating companies like Sage to run their hotel and restaurant for a fee, typically a percentage of revenue. And that kind of disaggregated function of having owners, brands, and operators leads to a lot of siloed reporting. And so if you think about Sage managing a Marriott hotel, it's hard to mix that Marriott data with, say, a Hilton or Hyatt data. They have strong interest in not seeing that data commingled. So for many years in industry, the data was very siloed. We get to this middle stage is then there were these middle layer kind of ETL type companies that came into being that really tried to standardize a lot of that data. So a 2-digit date from Marriott and a 4-digit date from Hyatt or Hilton, you could build that semantic layer, and that enabled web-based dashboards. And then, people started thinking about, well, I'm working on these dashboards. People are spending a lot of time on those. is there a way that we can, speed up the delivery of that information, make it a little more real time? Hotels and are 24/7 businesses, and so you need data, throughout the day. So is there a way to really simplify how we do that? And really what the industry is looking at going forward is, this is very mathematical. And so, and once again, being 24/7, is there a way to incorporate agents out there to help me as a hotel operator or as someone who's on property at the hotel restaurant really think about my data? Kind of like a 24/7 analyst who's always there looking out for me, helping me prepare for meetings with the operator, the brand, the owner, et cetera. And so everyone's really excited in our industry about what agentic AI can bring to the table.
Wow, that's a great overview. Just to step back one bit, how, you've been around Matt for a while in different industries. Well, how advanced would you say hospitality is in the use of data and analytics in general?
So I would say kind of medium. So my background, like I said, I've known Wayne for a long time. It was really in the retail space. You think about the transaction volume that happens at a retailer. Like I said, my background was working with Staples for a number of years, and then PetSmart. The transaction volume that happens when you have category, subcategory, product SKU, and then multiply all that times the receipt volume you have far exceeds the number of transactions you're going to have in a typical hotel. If you have a hotel, just quick math, if you have 200 rooms in a hotel and 80% occupancy, you have, 160 data points happening in that given night versus, what could be thousands of receipt transactions every day multiplied to the SKU. So you don't have as much data to pull from. I'd say is a big difference, and just the sophistication. We are a very human first industry. We like to say that we're unapologetically not AI first because AI first implies human second. We are a human first industry. You go to a hotel or restaurant to have the human interaction. And so just by the nature of that, you don't typically have the same army of analysts that you find in some other industries.
So do you find that the challenges are different then in hospitality than, say, retail, the technical challenges, business challenges, organizational challenges, or is it equivalent?
The challenges are, I would say, a little different in the retail world. Back in the day, the hard part with brick and mortar was just getting someone to the store. And then when someone got to the store, we used to measure success as someone would walk into the store, and success was they walked out holding a bag. Like walking out empty-handed was a failure. Either they couldn't find the product, it wasn't in stock, it wasn't at the right price, the staff wasn't attentive and being helpful to them. There was some reason why they walked out without a bag, and we spent a lot of time and effort in the BI world, in the retail, trying to figure out how to solve that problem.
Mm.
And then there's also a lot of vendor relationships, going back to like the categories, think of a PetSmart, you may have a category of dog food, then you have a subcategory of, is that dry or wet? Is it fresh or not fresh? And then you have all the SKUs. You may have hundreds of different varieties of dog food that are out there. And then you also have the manufacturing community, is this Purina or Blue Buffalo or, whatever it is. And so there's a lot of dimensionality to retail, just kind of like you think about how many SKUs you have at a Target or a Best Buy or, anyone like that. You don't have that same dimensionality in a hotel. There are fewer, you still have the time and the people and the guest or customer dimensions, but you don't have those other dimensions that we just talked about. So you're really solving for, you really want people at your hotel, that's occupancy. You want to get as high of a rate as possible. We call that ADR or average daily rate. When you combine the occupancy and the rate, you get what's called RevPAR or revenue per available room. That's kind of the efficiency metric for our industry. So you want to have as high of a revenue per available room. That's your balance between occupancy and rate. And then you want to see as much of that revenue flow to the bottom line, as much gross profit as possible. So that's really what you're trying to solve for. And the ultimate balance to that is guest satisfaction. So you could super staff your hotel with lots of people, everyone saying hi to you every 5 steps. Your labor expense would go through the roof, but you'd have great guest satisfaction, you'd have poor profit. So it's finding that right balance between, how much to spend in terms of, say, labor and other expenses of the hotel and balancing that with the guest satisfaction.
Just a handful of metrics. I suppose that makes your job a little bit more focused, maybe a little less, maybe a little easier in that regard. You know exactly what you need to optimize from a business as well as from a technology perspective.
Exactly. Yep. A little more focused in terms of what we're trying to accomplish.
So, Carlos, you obviously and Datalere, we work across many industries, and I'm wondering if you've had any insights into what the difference has been working in hospitality versus some other industry.
I think that's like Matt said, the data sometimes isn't as large as it is in other places, and the metrics to manage the organization or the properties is not, it's well known, I guess, and well understood. Uh, but I think what makes the comparing it to other industries that we work in and other companies that we work with, what makes it a little bit harder to work with is that he mentioned at first how every property or how the industry works as a whole. Yeah, properties are owned by different people, different organizations, different entities. They're run with different brands. They're run by different people, and so each property and each it really operates as their own business unit in a lot of ways. They have their own goals to meet. What might be important to a hotel in Washington, D.C. might be quite different what's important to a hotel in Miami, Florida, and the type of guests they get, the seasons, the way they run their hotel, the way they run their property. So I think it's dealing with that Matt mentioned uh, PetSmart, and I think the dog food I find in one PetSmart is probably going to be the same as the one I find in the other, and I think that's the goal in a industry like that because it's cheaper and easier for them to buy that way and make sure that I go to any PetSmart and I get the same thing. But in the hospitality industry, that's not what you want and that's not what you're expecting. And I think having to cater to individuals who are on the hook for running each organization or each property, but running it in a different way for different purposes is what makes the industry more complicated and different from a lot of other industries.
So that means there's got to be a lot of, I would think, a lot of customization of the data and the analytics output for each hotel that's under management. Is that correct?
Well, I think, and Matt can maybe speak to this better. I think one of the goals of an organization like Sage is to get everybody on the same technology running in a similar way, but the details may be a little bit different at each organization, and I think Matt could probably speak to that better. But I think there is a push to be technology consistent across the organizations, not have them run completely independently because then that would be too much chaos, it
Yeah.
seems. But I think from a point of view of the metrics they look at and that sort of thing, they're the same or very similar, but how they get to that is quite different, I think.
So that's a pretty good segue into our next slide here, which are just placeholders for our discussion. So let's drill into Sage. And Matthew, back to you. I mean, how has business intelligence evolved at Sage? And maybe you can address a little bit of what Carlos was just talking to as well.
No, definitely. I mean, I think going to something Carlos just said, because you have various owners, whether it's a publicly traded real estate investment trust, private equity company, maybe it's a family office, you have different interests. Some people are coming in for a long-term hold, kind of looking at a generational asset that they're going to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Some people are coming in, as part of a fund. Maybe they're going into a certain market for a 5 or 10 year hold or looking to buy make improvements and then flip that asset. So it's a different model than like Carlos said versus the retail side. So, coming from that retail background, it was interesting when I got to Sage, 10 years ago, and we had a Gartner Magic Quadrant BI tool in place. We had over 70 interactive dashboards that we had worked to build. And as I went out and spoke to various people at our hotels and restaurants and just asking, what do you like and not like about the dashboards, I ran into two things. One, there was not a high level of awareness that a lot of these dashboards existed, and there was an even lower level of adoption.
Mm,
And so we had spent all this money working with all kinds of different vendors and all kinds of different consultants building all these really fancy, slick dashboards that could work on your phone or work on a tablet or work on your computer, but had very low levels of awareness and adoption. And what we came to realize is that if you're leading a hotel or restaurant, you got into this industry because you're a people person, right? You didn't get into this industry to to sit behind a desk, behind a screen all day. You want to be interacting with guests. You want to be interacting with associates. You know, hotels and restaurants are living, breathing organisms. They're so dynamic. There's so much excitement going on at any given time that you really say, I want to treat my desk like a prison. I don't want to be there. I want to be out. And we have this goal where 80% of our property leader time, we want to be in front of people, not screens.
mm,
You see on my picture, my background, our mission at Sage is to enrich lives one experience at a time. We're very much into experiential hospitality. We like to say that we create places that people go to and not through, right? You can't create that kind of experience if the leadership is behind a desk and behind a screen. So we started meeting with the properties and saying, how do we get you out from behind that screen? And they said, well, think about what is the purpose of a web-based dashboard, right? It's all about the slice and dice and the drill down and the pivoting and changing from a table to a graph and all those things that are meant to, kind of like social media, just kind of suck you in. It's the quicksand of I could sit here for the next 3 hours and kind of geek out on this dashboard. And so we decided to go in the exact opposite direction. Kind of, a little bit of back to the future in some sense, of going in the past and saying, maybe we need to create static reports. It's kind of like, you know, non or illogical as that may sound. We started creating just simple PDF reports and said, okay, what time of day do these things go out? What's the minimum amount of information we can convey that'll make you really well informed about what's going on so that you can have informed conversations with various leaders, whether it's at the brand or the owner or the operator. And let's be really mindful about what that looks like. And so we've been partnering with Carlos over the last few years in this journey of moving away from the web-based dashboards for our hotel and restaurant audience. We still have them for some of the headquarters staff, the analysts whose full-time job it is to live in this data. But for the folks that are out there on the front lines operating every day, we've moved to these PDF reports, and it seems to work really well because they're all looking at the same data, the same type of report, and it's delivered right in their inbox. They can be on their phone or their tablet or their computer and see a nice PDF and know exactly what's going on.
This makes a lot of sense, although as someone who wrote a book on dashboards, it kind of hurts a little bit. But I mean, the point is actually so commonsensical, if that's the right word. I mean, you don't want your managers to be analysts and slicing and dicing data. You want them, as you say, to be out with the customers and the staff.
Yeah, I
So,
remember when I joined, both at Staples and at PetSmart, we spent a lot of time and effort building these, OLAP and ROLAP cubes that
yeah.
had all these drill down paths. And if you wanted to know what was going on with sales, and you could, drill by geography or drill by rep or drill by category, subcategory or SKU or vendor, all this different dimensionality that we built in that was really meant to every answer to any question you could possibly think of is on the screen in front of you. You just got to find the right drill path to get there. And that makes a lot of sense for folks that are in, say, like a home office or a support office. But when you're on the front line and you have a line of guests in front of you, or you have associates that need coaching or associates that don't show up to work, whatever the case may be, you have to free yourself from the desk and you have to free yourself from the screen. And like I said, we are a human first industry.
Mm.
I think, what I would say here too, because it does sound like a reversal of what a lot of us data leaders, I guess you would call us, have been saying for a long time, the moving people to self-service and getting people in front of that screen. But I have to say in the last 5 or 6 years, more and more, and again, it's a little bit more about what we preach today, is we should really give data to people the way they need it, how they need it. We've often tried to push various technologies on people. Now, this is going to be a better way for you to work now, and so now you're going to do it this way. We're going to build an enterprise data warehouse now. Everybody's going to get their data there. We're going to, give you these dashboards. Everybody's going to get their data there. We're going to take away Excel. Nobody's going to work in Excel. We've had these big proclamations that, for the most part, have failed or haven't gotten us all the way there. They've been good solutions that have moved us forward, but they haven't solved everybody's issue or everybody's problem. And I think what Matt's talking about here is something we're seeing in the industry as a whole. Not everybody wants the data the way we think they want it, the way I'm willing to give it to them, or the way I want it to be in front of them. Some people just want it their own way, and some people still want it in an Excel spreadsheet. Some people still want it as a simple static report. So I think we need to be prepared to provide it the way that individual or that business department or unit or whatever it is needs it and asks for it. And architectures need to be built for that.
Yeah, part of the reason for this is that there's a big disconnect in the industry between the vendors and the users. I mean, the vendors they love to put out, these complex, fancy technologies that they can charge a lot of money for. But they've always been those technologies in our space, the analytics space, has always been geared to the data analyst, the person who's slicing and dicing data all day. But that's a very small part of the market. It's like 10% of an employee base. And the large part is 90% of people really just want data as they want it. Oftentimes just as a static PDF report delivered to them. It's not fancy. It's not going to make the vendors a lot of money, but that's the reality. Is that most users just want the report. So it's been an uphill battle, and I think we're still fighting that battle, and we will be as long as there are vendors out there who want to make a lot of money pushing the latest and greatest technology. But we got to put the right tools in people's hands, and we've never been good at doing that. So it's really gratifying, Matt, to see you kind of push against the stream and go backwards technologically, but move forwards from an adoption perspective, and I would assume a satisfaction perspective as well.
Yeah, if you look at those initial metrics that I, kind of just looked at when I first joined Sage 10 years ago of awareness and adoption, I would say we're near 100% on both when it
Mhm.
comes to these reports because they're purpose built for this very specific audience. They go right into the inbox. You don't need to log into another system. You can literally be anywhere. Everyone's got a phone or a watch these days. You can just pull up, a PDF, pinch and zoom to see what you want to see, get really smart. And I know we're going to be talking about how we pair those PDFs with AI coming up, but that's where it gets really exciting as well.
Have you guys integrated your reports into other channels that business people like Slack, for instance, or chat of some
Yeah,
sort?
we experimented with Slack during the pandemic, and I think there was various rates of adoption. I think the more places people need to go to, it's kind of like you need to go somewhere versus you can go somewhere. So the more places you need to go, probably the lower adoption you're going to have.
Yeah.
That's different than the optionality of, hey, I'm going to put this out there in four different places, and you pick what's most convenient for you.
Mm.
So, today things are really delivered, like I said, through email because we find that that works. And it's, very trackable. It's very easy for people to consume. Like I said, people don't want a separate login. They don't want to go to a separate device. They don't want to have additional hoops to jump through. And so far, that's working pretty well.
So is it safe to say that a lot of them are looking at these reports on their mobile device or an iPad?
You know, it, there's really moments in time. So most hotels, if not all hotels, have a daily stand-up where the leaders get together. They talk about what's happening that day. Are there big groups in house? Are there, potential sales leads that are coming in? Are there big repairs that are happening? Are there VIPs arriving? So you have that stand-up, and the intent is for some of these reports to be there for that stand-up. Like, let's talk about, how did we do yesterday? How are we tracking for the week? How are we tracking to the month? How are we doing versus last year? How are we doing to forecast? How are we doing to budget? across a whole slate of metrics. And so, the idea is to bring up the financial acumen of all of the hotel leaders that we have. And so that these reports are built, with that in mind.
Okay. So stand-up reports that use in stand-up meetings.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's dive into AI then. So what's your thinking here in terms of leveraging AI and large language models at Sage?
Yeah, so we'll talk about two specific examples that we've partnered with Datalere on. The first is taking those PDF reports and, think about if you're the end consumer and you get this report, you may have a couple of questions. Why was that, rate that high or that low? Why was occupancy? We thought it was going to be 80%, but it was only 75%. Why was restaurant sales, you know, $50,000 and we thought it was going to be 75? Did it rain last night? What happened? And so you think about those would be conversations, then you would go to an analyst. You start having those why questions, right? Kind of classic BI. And so we partnered with Carlos and the team at Datalere to say, well, what if we were to engage what many would argue is ultimately the best financial analyst out there, which is LLMs, right? These large language models, be it ChatGPT or Google Gemini or, Perplexity or Claude, these are the smartest people in the room when it comes to knowledge. They have a PhD in every academic discipline. They've read over 200,000 books. They speak, 100 languages. They're 10-time world chess champion for fun. They have an MBA, a CPA, a JD, any kind of acronym credential you could think of. They are the smartest people, but there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. That's all knowledge. They don't necessarily know how to apply all that knowledge to your business. And so working with Carlos and the team at Datalere, we've been training these LLMs to think as hospitality financial analysts, to be the best FP&A or financial planning analyst out there. That's the persona. And now look at this report and say, okay, an operator is going to get this report. They're going to consume it. They're going to have a bunch of why questions. Let's just get ahead of that. And so if there's a one-page report, there's also now a one-page commentary or a narrative that comes with it that explains, here's everything you're going to see on the data. And it's actually intentionally the first page. So you read the narrative and you look at the numbers, it all makes sense now. And so those first, second, and third questions that you may have for someone in your organization are already answered by the LLM. And so that's the kind of first marriage we've done is combining the best AI insights from these, kind of automated FP&A analysts slash agents with those PDF reports.
So is this deployed yet? Or
Yes, this is now live across all of our properties. And, we're seeing very high rates, once again, of adoption where people are reading that first page, this cover page. They're getting really smart on what's happening. And then they use the data, kind of the traditional dashboard, if you will, as kind of secondary because we've surfaced the big highlights that, what you need to know and what are the actions and the recommendations are all in that cover narrative. And then you can drill into the details if you want to on that second page. And that seems to be working pretty well.
and how accurate and insightful are the AIs in delivering insights that are useful to the managers?
Yeah, I'll let Carlos talk about, the guardrails we've put in place because that's a great question, Wayne. We've really tightened the screws to prevent hallucination. We don't want someone saying, "Hey, you should close your hotel and go open up an ice cream shop." So in terms of the recommendations and the insights, the good news is it has all of our financial data, at its disposal when it's making. It's not just making on that one isolated day. So it has all properties and all time frames to available to it. But Carlos can talk about some of the guardrails we put in place.
Yeah, and let me kind of I'll talk about that in a minute, but I wanted to kind of go back to I remember the first time we talked to Matt about this process potentially. There was a particular report that is used in by the headquarters people, by people that work in the corporate office that shows every property. So think of a report that had 75 properties going across the top, and let's say 12 measures for each property going down the left-hand side, something like that. So I have 900 measures on this report, and some of them might be interesting, but a lot of them aren't. They're kind of what I saw yesterday, and what I saw the day before. So the question really is, what should I be worried about on this report? What do you want to tell me that's interesting here? Because that saves me the trouble of looking at all 900 measures and saying, wow, this one, it dropped 5% from yesterday. That's a red flag, or having some kind of baked in process that says I'll make everything that drops more than 5% red, or something like that. But this way, the analyst, the AI analyst, could actually point out what you needed to focus on, because again, when I get a report like that, I'm not worried so much about what's going well. I worry about what's going not well, right? What's going wrong. Did something suddenly skew downwards when I didn't expect it to? So, so if you think about that, that's how the analyst can help you. It can help you find one measure that's the most interesting out of those 900 and point it out to you. And the guardrails that Matt talked about is, there's obviously a RAG component to this. We're using Sage's data, right, as the data set that through a data model that we've developed over, we had already worked on developing and continue to develop that supports the measures and metrics that are being reported on. So we ensure that the responses for the analyst all come from data that's within Sage's organization. We also tell it things like don't use industry generic data. Don't use, let's make sure you use the data that's coming, building good semantic layers, I guess maybe is the best way to put it, is make sure we define the semantic layers properly so that it uses the data properly. We give it sample queries sample questions and queries on how we would answer those questions. We build the right relationships in those semantic layers, and we define everything properly so that when something is analyzed, it uses the right terms. For example, the right acronyms. Matt mentioned RevPAR earlier, and we wanted to make sure that RevPAR is the industry term that Sage uses for that calculation versus it finding through its LLM that RevPAR is something completely different from another industry. So those types of building that semantic layer and putting the guardrails around the semantic layer about how it's used, how it's defined, what kind of questions you can answer, what kind of questions you can answer, and is really important in making it work correctly. So it doesn't hallucinate or doesn't come up with something that is just quote unquote just made up, or that it grabbed from some industry document and not from Sage's data.
So that's interesting because it's an LLM, it's going to give you a much more sophisticated insight than a rule-based system for sure, and maybe even an analyst. And both of those are constrained by the number of variables they can look at over time, whereas these systems can look at hundreds or thousands potentially variables over long periods of time to generate an insight that's probably much more sophisticated. So it's ferreting out the signal from the noise better. Is that fair assessment?
It is, but there's also, we also are careful not to point it at millions and millions of transactions and have it tell me, hey, what's interesting in those transactions? We essentially have a multi-step process where the report is produced and the report has aggregates and measures that are trended over time, measures that are compared today versus yesterday, this week versus last week, things like that. So we have it use that output as the data that's being that the narrative and the AI analyst produces the narrative based on that. So it's a multi-step process to get it to where we want to get it. And essentially what we want the analyst to do in the PDF is to take the same snapshot of data that an executive would be looking at or a user would be looking at and give me an analysis on that, because it won't make sense to say, let's point it at all this detailed transactional data and find something there, which I can't see on the report. So it's definitely a multi-step development process that ultimately gets you to have the analysis line up with what you're seeing on the dashboard or on the screen.
So it sounds like you're cleaving pretty close to the process an individual human analyst might follow to come up
Right.
with insights. Yeah.
That's right.
And how long did it take you to build and test and deploy this with how many people?
Boy, that's going to be a tough one for me to say at this point. Matt might know better. Here. Let me preface this by saying this, right? And I've said this before in other webinars we've had. If you have a strong data foundation, all this becomes easier. Right? If you're starting from nothing and your data is just unmodeled, unarchitected, it's all over the place, it's dirty. The first thing you have to do is do that. Build that data foundation and model the data. I keep saying, AI may be able to do all this work, but there's no magic in it. It can take data that doesn't make sense and make sense out of it for you.
Mm.
So you model the data so that an intelligent human would be able to use the data. And then that's when you start the AI work. So the fact that we had already been working with Matt uh, beforehand on that type of work to build dashboards to do other things for them made a difference in the amount of time. Now, once you put the AI work on top of it, it becomes much easier. You can get really solid, really good results in 3 to 4 months, I think, with just a couple of engineers that working on it, where you already have most of the foundation built. Now you need to build semantic layers. You need to build out. You need to build the training questions. You need to build the right prompts. That sort of thing. So you're looking at a development effort on top of a data architecture that's already well modeled. And I think that makes a difference. If you weren't starting there, it would take quite a bit longer.
So the end result is that Sage is getting a whole bunch of new digital analysts. So the question to you, Matt, is how does this change how you hire and retain human analysts? Does it have any impact?
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, we're a human first organization, and we really want our analysts out there focused on more complex questions. That's kind of the difference we talked about earlier about the knowledge versus wisdom, is that the AI is the smartest person in the room. They bring the most knowledge to the table, no question on that. But they don't have the wisdom of how to apply all these things. But I think, an important thing that Carlos said is this is really what we've been working on for the last few years, is building this foundation. And once you have a really strong foundation, adding the LLM to the PDF report, it's nice, it's helpful. That's, kind of a basic first step, if you will. Having the strong foundation is going to enable us to do a lot more sophisticated. The first thing you have here on the slide is the forecasting. So, the three most mathematical functions in running a hotel or a restaurant are in setting your demand forecast, right? Like what's going to happen? We're sitting here now in March. What's going to happen in April, right? I know what reservations are on the books. I know what groups are happening. I know if there's baseball, hockey, or, you know, uh, basketball games happening. I know if there's concerts happening. I have lots of information I know about right now. Yet most hotels, I would, dare say the majority of hotels out there aren't great forecasters, even 30 days out. It's a very dynamic, you could have bad weather that then delays flights. Like what's going on with TSA right now. I mean, there's so much, you know, dynamic activity happening in our industry that it is a really hard thing to forecast. But everything starts with that forecast. And then I like to think of it as the letter Y. The base is your forecast for the next 30 days. And then the two branches that come from that is once you have your forecast, you're going to set your labor schedule. And labor is the most expensive component of running a hotel, right? It's a number one expense by far. And then you're going to do the second piece, which is set your pricing. If your hotel is showing not to be as occupied as you want, maybe you need to adjust your pricing strategy. If your team just made the playoffs, like I hope both our basketball and hockey teams here in Denver make the playoffs, which they're both looking like they're going to, change our pricing strategy again. We're not having as great of a snow season, but then that opens up. Maybe the mountain bike season starts a little earlier. So you need to adjust, to those different flows. So we're working with Carlos and the Datalere team to say, how do we really leverage this really strong foundation that we've built over the last few years, all the incredible power of the AI algorithms that are out there, The algorithms are kind of the public, kind of what everyone can digest. It's really the models is really where you get your secret, 11 herbs and spices, so to speak, the secret formulas. And so how do we develop our own proprietary model for forecasting hotels and restaurants at Sage? Based on everything we've done on these foundations, teaching all that wisdom we've talked about. And the analysts, to answer your question, Wayne, are contributing to that because our analysts and our finance and revenue leaders have been building these forecasts for, we've been in business over 40 years. We have 40 years of experience in building forecasts. And now we finally have an engine, this AI that can really enhance and augment and assist us with just what you said, look at hundreds or thousands of variables that a human just can't process and say, okay, how do I input all those things, not just historical trends, but all those additional variables and come up with a more precise forecast? Because the more precise forecast I have, the better my labor scheduling and the better my pricing strategy.
Yeah, in my experience in consulting with organizations and helping to develop data strategies and talking to departmental leaders, no one ever had enough data analysts. In fact, the organization should have hired 10 to 100 times more data analysts. There was just an unmet need, infinite almost unmet need. So my sense is that these LLMs are going to help address the backlog of needs out there. And maybe companies won't need to hire new analysts, but they'll get a hell of a lot more productivity out of the existing analysts. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and I think you're hitting on something, in the past and my background in BI, the backlog of report requests was never ending.
Yeah.
You could have 100, 200, 300 report requests that people had. You don't see the backlogs like that anymore because so much is now the self-service. I can take a simple report, throw it into an LLM, and take the persona of the financial analyst, take the persona of someone's creating a forecast, take the persona of someone's doing a pricing strategy, and just help me think about. I love that prompt. Just help me think about.
Mm.
Don't sell me on something. The LLMs like to make you feel great, but just help me think about something. Help me ask constructive questions. What might someone ask me about this data? Help me prepare, help me coach for a session. There's so much power to these tools now, but really this idea of, partnering your best financial data analysts with these tools, we're extremely optimistic that not only will the financial acumen of our organization grow, but the forecasting, the labor scheduling, the pricing strategies will all augment as well.
So the two applications for you were the AI annotation and forecasting.
Those are the two right now. We have a bunch of other ones that are in development with Datalere, not ready to discuss just yet. Keeping those in the development labs.
And what's the status of the forecasting app? Is that deployed?
That'll be deployed a little later this year,
Excellent.
but on track and very excited.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like you made a lot of progress quickly because, as Carlos was saying, you've taken the time to develop that strong data foundation and modeled your data, and now you can do all this cool stuff with AI on top. So let's go to the next slide, which is I think I'm going to start with you, Carlos, here, since you've developed or you're in the process of developing AI applications for a number of clients. You kind of have this sample AI roadmap. Do you want to step our audience through this?
Yeah, you asked a little bit earlier about the approach here, and this is a sample roadmap. We've kind of done similar things like this for Matt and Sage, or we've done it for other companies, but essentially in one case here, there was for example, in this roadmap, let's assume all the data is on-prem. You haven't built that foundation yet. You're not in the cloud. It'd be great if you're going to start this journey to be in the cloud. So we had a kind of a four-step process here of how do we get somebody over to Snowflake and get them up and running on the type of things Matt's talking about. So initially, there's a migration of the data to Snowflake. We do some code conversion, some testing. That becomes the foundation of AI and for machine learning. That migration, getting the data up into the cloud, getting into a compute engine and a compute cluster like Snowflake can provide. in this case. And at the same time, what we want to do is start utilizing a lot of the things that could be really valuable, like the data marketplace that could provide us with data outside of our organization. And that's one thing we didn't talk about much. You talk about, for example, doing a forecast. And Matt mentioned, what if there's a playoff game, or what if there's bad weather? And in the past, it's been difficult to build forecasting models that are responsive to those kinds of things. But now, with the availability of data and being able to ingest and use data from not just from within your organization, from outside your organization, these could all be factors in improving your forecast. So we augment the data with a data marketplace, with files and data sets we get from the data marketplaces. At the same time, we talked about forecasting and machine learning, defining use cases, engineering the data for that type of forecasting, developing the models, and testing and deployment. So while we're building out a Snowflake cloud infrastructure, we're also building out machine learning models that we'll be able to use and help us with the forecasting. We also then can use Snowflake Cortex, build out an application that becomes an interface to do AI analysis. We also, to get there, we have to do semantic view and semantic layer development. And then ultimately, we can put AI agents in place that can help us with the forecasting, or answer questions that are much more complex than just show me a piece of data. For example, at the bottom there, one of the questions I have is, how will Taylor Swift's concert schedule impact our revenue? Well, that may be somewhat unknown, but that's something that the power of an LLM may actually be able to help you with. The knowledge that it has from the outside world, it may be able to tell you that, in the last 5 years, every hotel within 5 miles of a Taylor Swift concert has been sold out, right? And so that kind of knowledge can be injected into your machine learning or your forecasting, and improve it, so that it doesn't follow the usual patterns of what you would with forecasting, but you actually get better. And over on the right, we mentioned, Matt mentioned the playoffs with basketball and hockey, and when we put this together, we were talking about the Denver Broncos making the Super Bowl. So instead of asking it a question about how will my forecast be impacted, because that's a very short-term thing. When a team makes a Super Bowl in 2 weeks, things change. So I ask an agent to adjust my operations when the Broncos if the Broncos make the Super Bowl, or the fact that the Broncos did make the Super Bowl. And so the agent may come back and says, I looked, and you're going to have you're going to need to staff 20% more people. You're going to add more people to the restaurants. You're going to need provide more services, that sort of thing. So the agent could come back and actually make recommendations about your organization, and help you respond to changing situations much faster. So essentially, that type of roadmap is where we ultimately want to get. I mean, we laid this out over a 12-month period, and of course, the agent is the hardest part of it, because it has to have access to a lot of data, and sometimes all the data within the organization, to make sure it makes good decisions, or helps you make good decisions. But along the way, that's how we get to a good revenue forecasting model that uses AI and machine learning as well.
Well, this is pretty impressive. It actually looks like it's a 9-month model to get from starting from scratch to, AI generated forecasts and other applications.
It is. I mean, I think in general, again, the step that we're kind of overlooking a little bit here is the Snowflake migration was not the data models that were needed here were already being built on-prem, in an on-premise type of situation. So when the Snowflake migration takes place, you're already leveraging the value of an existing data lakehouse, or at least the start of a data lakehouse, that now you can build even better in Snowflake, or in the cloud. So there's a little bit of of where are you starting, where are you at today, and then where are you going. So this is a sample roadmap, wouldn't apply exactly to everybody, but this is just one way to look at it from somebody coming from an on-prem situation where some work had already taken place.
Right. So all the models were pretty much developed and you just had to migrate them, not build them from scratch, which took
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
couple months.
And ongoing work continued to model more data, but essentially what was needed for say the forecasting and using AI was already in place.
Well, this is damn encouraging. I mean, and we're using LLMs now to do the migration to help with that, as well as help do data consolidation. If you are starting from scratch, it's not as bad or expensive as it used to be 5, 10 years ago. Is that true, Carlos?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a migration and a conversion is actually a good candidate for using LLMs to help you with getting data not just migrated but converted over to a new platform. That can all be done much faster. In fact, even from a year ago to today, there's quite a bit of advances in that area that helps you do it much faster. So it used to be a showstopper, the try to moving off of one platform onto another was a much bigger effort. Now it can be done much, much quicker and much easier.
Yeah, it
You,
was
you know, you
before.
mentioned or Matt mentioned the huge backlog in BI, and of course, I look at the new paradigm that we're working in today is we need help, right? We as BI practitioners and analytics practitioners have been way behind. And now we're able to do things that we weren't able to do before. And you talk about what's a data analyst going to do today? Well, they're going to find new data sets that have never been used before that will impact the forecast and help an organization like Sage have a competitive advantage over others because they're including data sets that maybe haven't been not only not been available, it's something you couldn't even think of 5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of all the consultancies that made tons of money helping companies, migrate databases, build data warehouses and data lakes, and they're gonna have to find a little bit newer work, I think, because this stuff's
Yeah.
gonna be accelerated, as your time frame here suggests that it's not gonna
Yeah,
take
I like to say now when you can start doing the work when you finish the data warehouse. And that the data warehouse isn't the end, it's the start. Right? Now you can do all the good stuff.
Yeah. So let's bring this back to Matt. Curious, Matt, where do you guys go from here at Sage? Do you have any future plans that you can share?
Yes, I think the future, as we talked about a little earlier, there's a few other projects that are kind of under development right now. Really we're looking at areas where we can build things that are both proprietary and differentiating. And so you think about building something on, like as Carlo showed, putting on something on Snowflake, that's not necessarily differentiating in the sense that, other people can build things on Snowflake. But if you really can build a model that has a high level of accuracy for something like forecasting,
Mm.
that becomes extremely proprietary because now you have the secret model and you can start to differentiate. You have a head start in front of everyone else. So we're excited about some of those things. We have a couple other things under development. And then really, back to the title of the session, the agentic piece is where there's a ton of opportunity. So if you think about all the different tasks that people are working on, you know, the question I heard this professor from MIT recently ask, which is, think of every task you do in your job or that other people do, in your organization. Can that task be automated, augmented, or agentically assisted by AI?
Mm.
And everything kind of falls into one of those categories. Like we said, we are a human first industry. Our goal is not to automate people out of jobs. Humans are what make experiential hospitality special. That warm feeling you get when you walk into a lobby and you're greeted and you have a great meal experience. And just, there's so many human elements to having a great hotel and restaurant experience. We want to make sure we preserve all of that. But the best way we're going to do that is to free up people's time with those tasks that can be automated, augmented, or agentically assisted. And I think the agent piece is where we see the biggest opportunity of, where
Mm.
can I have an agent? I think in my own personal, I'll give you one example, in my own personal life, something I'm working on. So in the morning, I get up, I check the weather forecast. right? And what matters really is it going to rain today, right? And it doesn't really matter if it's going to rain today. It matters when it's going to rain. If it's going to matter during my commute when I'm walking into the office, okay, the agent should tell me, hey, Matt, there's a chance it's going to rain between 8 and 9 when you're walking into the office. Make sure you have an umbrella, right? That's really what matters. Or you have a tennis game scheduled for 6 o'clock tonight. It looks like it's going to rain today. That doesn't matter as much. It looks like it's going to rain at 6 o'clock. So I've already gone out and reached out to the tennis facility and see if they have availability for an indoor court versus an outdoor court. And they do. It's not at 6 or 6:30. So I've already reached out to the other three people you're playing with and asked, can they move the time to 6:30? That is the real promise of agentic AI. Very simple use case. How can you use it in your day-to-day context? It doesn't have to be this crazy pie in the sky idea. Just think about what are those little friction points you have in your day. And we're thinking about how those little friction points can be addressed in our hotels and restaurants.
Great. So in the minute or two that we have left, and I want to get back to Carl's one question too, but are the employees on board with agentic AI? Has this been socialized?
They are in the sense that we are not trying to automate. Once again, we're not trying to replace the human element. We're trying to free them up. But go back to that. We want 80% of their time to be in front of people, not screens. Most folks will say amen. Let's start looking about where I'm spending time in front of screens and what can I do to automate, augment, or agentically assist.
Perfect. Perfect. Now, Carlos, we should probably say this slide that we had up, the chart, mentioned Snowflake, but you obviously work with a lot of other data platforms besides them, right?
We do, yeah. This was it's just an example of something we pulled and decided to use it as a sample roadmap. There's almost any platform today, any of the cloud database platforms would be appropriate and can be done. This type of work can be done. It's always difficult to say what the standard will become or who the winner is going to be in all of these. But you see products like Snowflake, Databricks, Fabric. They're all kind of setting the kind of leading the group, I guess, in that sense, or at least they're competing with each other and putting most of the features that the other one has into their own product. So I think it can be done in a lot of different platforms, and it doesn't have to be with Snowflake. Snowflake just happens to be a one you can get up and running fairly quickly with in this case.
Great. Well, gentlemen, I think that's a wrap. This was a lot of fun. I think we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and I think we gave people a lot of insight on the future of agentic AI and AI in general in the hospitality industry. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Matt.
Carlos. You guys have a great day.